Commissioners' work session to order. And let us say we will, at 3:03, we have a quorum now. And say welcome to those of you that are here. And I'll remind everyone this is indeed a work session. We're going to end at approximately 5 p.m. and no action will be taken today. Having said that, and I'll maybe have another word or two in a second, but I'd like to ask Jeff Wooten, can you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Yes, sir. Yeah, please.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. At our work session prior to this, we came up with a whole list of things, and we asked our attorney to go forward and to pull together what I'll call a first draft, so each and every one of us can discuss this.
Sorry, Lisa.
And I'm going to, I'm not situated exactly right, but I'm going to ask Adam and Lisa, and Courtney, of course, to begin this discussion. And Adam, if you will, I had not to explain this whole process, but if you could run down the line of what happens today and what's going to happen afterwards, so there's everything's out in the open.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So at the prior work session, I would have described that as sort of the bigger picture. There were a lot of conversations about where we're headed and what we as staff had identified areas that we were trying to address or make changes to our ordinances. This meeting, I think the intention here is to start forming up what those ordinances will actually look like. So my office and myself has spent some time putting into what I believe the actual intention of the body is to make changes to some of the ordinances. I'd like to kind of keep the same order chronologically that we talked about previously based on what I believe is the priorities of the board. But again, like the last work session, I still think this is open-ended. And even in our processes, we've come across a few more issues that I wanted to bring to the board's attention to get some direction on. But as to the chairman's point and to the public, the process is we are attempting to get an ordinance together and then bring it to the board for approval. This is not the usual way. Normally an ordinance is drafted and the first time the public would see it was when a request is made for a public hearing to amend the ordinances. Under Putnam County's ordinances, you are required to hold a public hearing, run a newspaper ad before you adopt a change to the ordinances. Because these involve planning or they touch the Zoning Procedures Act, we're also going to be required to run everything both to the newspaper on that and through your planning commission. So we have several steps along the way. There will be several more opportunities for public input. There'll be several more opportunities for the members of the commission to weigh in on changes. But ultimately, it's like I said at the last meeting, all these conversations that we're having about planning and development in the county, they have to go into the ordinances. So the ultimate result of all this effort will be new rules, new laws on how we do certain development within the county. So to start, I thought that the thing that we spent the most time talking about, or maybe the one that's more present, that's a little bit more definable, maybe not quite the where do we want to go as a community, but things that I think are more structural, was the addition of a new zoning district that I've referred to as Commercial Crossroads. So if Mercy, you guys could put up, let me make sure I got the right. You'll put up. So presently in your zoning ordinances, you have established certain districts. You have R1R, R1, R2, RM1, RM3, your industrial districts, your C1, your C2. Based on the conversations that I heard, we're looking for a commercial district that would be a little bit more focused, a smaller use size than what we see in C1, that would be more oriented around intersections that currently don't have development that are having an increase in traffic, that the uses that would go there would be more service towards those types of communities without having an impact on the agricultural or the residential uses around that area. So my suggestion would be to create a new zoning district, which would be the CC. Yeah, it should be on the email. I didn't have any jokes planned, but I can usually get some going if y'all give me a topic. I'm just kidding.
CC, not CD.
CC, that's my proposal. So if you've looked at the zoning ordinances, this mirrors the format that your other zones use. You guys have a pretty formulaic way of doing your zoning districts. You start with purpose, you go to uses allowed, and then you will set your standards for development within the area that deal with, say, the lot size and setbacks and whatnot. But what I'd like to do is go through this and take direction from the body on what we've put together and see if there's any changes or anything you want differently. Just for purposes of everybody following, this is a brand new ordinance, so this would not be changing anything, but we did use your C1 and your C2 designation as a template and kind of built back from that. So the purpose at the beginning, you are laying out the reason that you are setting aside this zoning district. Why do you want it to exist? And I tried to capture what I heard, that the uses in this district are those most commonly expected to be present in underdeveloped intersections of public right-of-ways and thoroughfares that currently experience or are expected to experience increased traffic patterns as a result of increased development within the county. Uses within this district should be compatible with the surrounding community and service vehicle and pedestrian traffic with minimum impact on the nearby residential agricultural uses. So the goal here is to have uses that would be thought of to exist in areas that would be serviced by pedestrians, also not have an awful lot of vehicular traffic, but those that would be incidental to the traffic that's already there. 66-112 would lay out the uses, and I want to go through these uses. This is what I gathered, but this is really for the board to give us a direction on. We took the C1 use and then started marking out uses, which I think was consistent with the conversations we were having. I want to first bring up bars, taverns, pub, lounge, and liquor stores. I don't know how much we're trying to drink in these intersections, but I recognize those first, so I put both of those. If you want to be teetotalers and take it off, that's up to y'all. But brew pubs, clinics, child daycare centers, religious facilities, restaurants, and workshops limited, all of those everything on there has a definition in y'all's code. So it's defined elsewhere in the code. But those are the uses that we put in that are pretty similar to what the other ones in that area, or at least in your lower commercials, would be. Consumer goods and rentals, contract services, limited, nurseries, offices, and many warehouses. Those are uses that I believe we would want in that area, but the question that I posed to the body was whether or not you wanted to include a square footage limit for those particular uses. Because those are some that the bigger they are, the more foot traffic you might have. So for example, in offices, if you had a square footage requirement in those areas, more square footage would usually mean more office workers. And then the biggest one that I heard the most conversation about was convenience stores. It seemed that we wanted to allow those, but we wanted to have some limitation on both the number and the size. So I placed the maximum of 6 gas pumps, and then subject to subsection D below, which I'll jump to in a second. But subsection D is intended to have a limitation on how many you can have in a certain area. In other words, if you have this use in a certain area, it would not be able to be in the same, within that distance. And that wouldn't just be within the zone. It would be if there was a neighboring property that wasn't in this zone that also met that definition, there would be restrictions. Subsection B remains the same as C1 and C2. Subsection C is new to the code and also new to Putnam County. It is the creation of architectural review standards. So essentially what you would do is if you wanted to develop in these zones, you would have to first receive a certificate of appropriateness. It's up to you as a body to decide what those standards would be, but this is an intention to make a set of building standards, architectural standards that makes things, buildings and structures look a certain way. Those can be very, very detailed, or they could be more general. It's up to you as a body to decide. I'm of the position, I'm fully unqualified to say what is a good architectural review, or what's a good architectural set of standards for you. But the easiest thing I can think of is what do other jurisdictions do and what do you like? City of Madison is relatively close to us. They have some architectural review standards I could send to the board to look at. City of Greensboro has some. They're basically oriented along the interstate. So if you get off the interstate in Madison or Greensboro and make a left or right, you'll see some of the pedestal signs are smaller. You'll notice that the facades all face the state highways. They usually have some building materials that are a little nicer, I guess, than some other areas. That's kind of the intention. But the way, regardless of what the standards are, the way it works is if you go to build, you can't just get a building permit and start. You must also get a certificate of appropriateness. My suggestion is we run that through planning and development, but allow planning and development to hire a design professional to review those for us, which is similar to what we do at the TRC committee for some of the engineering standards that come up. And essentially what it is an architect or an otherwise qualified professional will look at the proposal against the design regulations and say it works or it doesn't. And then work with the developer on what needs to be changed or what doesn't have to be, what we could do differently. And then ultimately we run that, if you'll scroll up a little bit more, it runs in the same way that if a person is aggrieved by a decision, they can come to the Board of Commissioners for appeal. So if, say, they submitted some plans that they believe complied with the regulations, but our staff does not, then it comes to the Board of Commissioners to make that determination. And then subsection D is what I talked about earlier. It is the ability to avoid over-concentration. So the idea, I've borrowed this from, there's been somewhat of a movement in development to try to avoid dollar stores or smaller commercial grocery style operations from being too close to one another, mainly because they typically have a negative impact on existing grocery stores. So for instance, the city of Greensboro has a regulation that I'm going to use the term dollar store for our conversation, although it's defined a little differently, can't be within 1 mile of another one, because conceptually it can kill other business development in a certain area, and there's been some studies that show the impact it has. This concept here is really just to keep it away from certain intersections. In other words, if you get one use there, the way I've drafted it was just for the convenience stores, but if you wanted to include other uses within that requirement to push them apart, I think that is what you can do. I've drafted it to where you can add in uses by reference above. And then at 66-113, that is your development standards. These are borrowed from C1. So these are your same standards for C1. You have the minimum lot size and all your setbacks. I discussed with Ms. Jackson, your setbacks are going to be a little bit difficult to take from or make any greater because you're already orienting to 2 public roads. So you're already going to be kind of nestled away from those to begin with. But obviously that's within the purview of the board if you wanted to increase those requirements. The one thing that Ms. Jackson brought up that is a little bit bigger of an issue, but one that I think we need to go ahead and put on the board's radar are your sign ordinances. So we started looking at other jurisdictions' sign ordinances, and ours are 18 years old, I think. So in 2007, you adopted the most current iteration of the sign ordinances. Those need to be reviewed, and in addition to making sure that they still comply with both state and federal law on commercial speech, I think you also should think about it from a development standpoint, because right now, most jurisdictions are getting into things like height and square footage limitations on signage. Currently, in y'all's ordinances, you have a certain set of uses that are allowed in different, signs that are allowed in different zones. I just don't know that we've looked at them. And in this conversation, we started looking to say, well, do we want to include what we do in C1 and C2 right now, or do we want to create some new ordinance, do changes for the signs? And if we're doing them for CC, I think it might be a good idea to look at all of them. But everything else stays with what was in C1, but obviously all of this is up to the board to decide. I wanted to try to get this in Word so we can actually start moving things around. So I don't mean to talk the whole time. The idea here is to set it up and then for the commissioners to say, well, these uses are good, or these uses are bad, or I wanted to include this, or I think the setback should be different. I mean, that's the concept here. Just structurally on this item, I know the second part of this conversation is where are we going to put those? And Ms. Jackson has brought a blown up map of each district. So below the future land use table in front of us is each district. So at some point, I think it would be appropriate for us to go ahead and start looking at which intersections we're thinking for this type of use. And we can go through each chart and everybody can look and see. The zoomed in spots will kind of show which roads I think we're discussing here. So.
Okay, I have a question, and roll back to the top. You mentioned the word clinic. Are we talking about a clinic for humans or for animals?
I believe it's humans, but before I tell you that.
Both? Could you have a veterinarian clinic in this? I'm just asking, I'm not.
Did you mean like a one-stop shop kind of thing, or just kidding?
Like a,
So there's a specific definition for.
Yeah, everything on there has a definition. Let me pull up 66. I'm fairly positive that is human. Lisa keeps telling me it's human.
but
so.
you could have animals? I mean, like a veterinarian
So we have a
clinic?
separate definition for animals.
Okay, I just didn't see that.
Which could be a definition, it could be a use that you include in there. So currently, clinic is defined as a use other than a hospital or nursing home where persons are counseled, examined, and or treated by one or more persons providing any form of healing or medical health service. These include urgent care facilities. So it's sort of your doctor's offices or the prompt now, urgent care type operations.
Then my question goes back again, what about an animal hospital or about, veterinarian clinics are getting to be very popular. Everybody's got an animal. And it's not just for large animals, it's for their dogs and cats and canaries and other animals.
Sure, y'all got one for that.
Animal? Yes, we have an animal clinic.
Yeah, y'all have got a definition, but let me find it.
Is that not a fair question?
What is a clinic? Wouldn't have a problem taking all that out of there.
That's fine.
Yeah, you've got two definitions for animal. You have animal care general, means animal care uses with either an outdoor facility or an overnight component or both. Examples may include animal daycares, animal shelters, overnight boarding facilities, veterinarian clinics with boarding or nighttime emergency services, and pet stores that sell cats, dogs, or birds larger than 12 inches. And then you also have animal care limited, means animal care uses which neither an outdoor facility nor an overnight component. Examples may include animal grooming facilities and veterinarian clinics without boarding. So y'all got two definitions, one more intense, one less. So If you wanted to include animal care limited or general, both of those would probably fit within the uses we've discussed.
I would defer to our commissioners, and, but I just thought that veterinary clinics are getting to be more popular,
Especially on weekends.
right? So I would defer to them of what they think about that. And then the other commissioners will have ideas about what's right there. That's where to start, I guess. Gentlemen? Jeff?
Adam, what's the definition of the workshop?
Workshop limited means an establishment with 3,000 square feet or less of gross floor area, primarily engaged in light industrial tasks such as farm equipment repair, welding, woodworking, carpentry, or other similar trades.
I'm not sure I'd be right there on the corner. I'm not sure I'd be happy with that one being there because of the equipment being parked outside and broke down all the time. I don't think that would look good on a corner at an intersection. So I'm not sure I'd be happy with that. I'd like to get the input from the rest of the commissioners on that one. Because you know how a mechanic shop looks.
Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with that either. I wouldn't mind taking off the bar, tavern, pub, lounge, and the liquor stores. The tavern, lounge, and liquor stores.
Under A, bar, tavern, pub, and lounge is what he'd like off, and liquor stores is down the way. And Jeff said he would like to see the workshop taken off. Others? Commissioner Hersey?
Well, first of all, I would say that if we're gonna create a new zone, CC zone, that any establishment in a CC zone must have a solid screening between it and any other zone. As far as the workshop is concerned, I would agree with Commissioner Wooten. That is not a C1 type facility. I mean, because you're going to have broken down equipment outside the workshop. I'd say that the workshops should go someplace a little bit more discreet. As far as the bar, tavern, pub, and lounge is concerned, I would leave that in there. Just anecdotally, moved from New York State to North Carolina, Durham, North Carolina. In New York State, there was a family pub, if you will, or bar on virtually every corner. And Friday nights, generally, you'd go there for fish fry and enjoy a family outing. Moved to Durham, North Carolina, and it was dry. There were no restaurants that served any kind of beer or liquor or anything of that sort. Came time for the World Series. Well, I couldn't go to the neighborhood pub to watch the World Series, so I had to go out and buy a TV set. I mean, and praise the Lord, I've had a TV set ever since.
So I understand the focus on intersections, because it's a logical place for novel development, but I wonder if we'd be smart to think of this district as essentially about areas of new commercial development in general, rather than just Crossroads, because I could imagine it coming up in other circumstances where we'd have the same sensitivities. Maybe it's mostly intersections, but it could occur elsewhere. So I would vote for broadening this a little bit to areas of new development, just to get us going, regardless of exactly where they are.
There's one more I'd like to look at, and it would be the contractor services. What all would be included in that? Would it be like, you talking about just somebody like, an office, or is it gonna be where lumber is gonna be and stored there? You see what I'm saying? I mean, I wouldn't want something, a yard full of lumber and planks and paper and stuff like that. They're trying to mess it up, kind of like the workshop. How could we control that to just be an office to go there and talk to a contractor to build your house?
You have two definitions for contract services, limited and general. So limited is no outdoor yard. It's just the office. General would be, you have a lumber yard, you have your materials in the back. But in limited, it is just interior. So it'd be like if a construction office has an office, or excuse me, a construction company has an office.
Okay.
But again, one thing we haven't really talked about would be if you wanted to include a square footage limit on any of these uses. And that may not be the question that you need to answer today, but I do think that's one way of trying to show that the intention here is to keep things a little smaller as far as use goes. And to Commissioner Garrett's point, we are using the term crossroads, but this definition, this zoning district could be used anywhere. We're not anchoring it to just this area. I take your point, though. There may be a way for us to reword the purpose section to include both intersections where there's increased traffic and other areas where there's not necessarily limited to intersections. That the idea of it being close to established agricultural and residential, because I think normally commercial, I'm not a historian, but I've done this long enough to know that usually commercial grows, sort of it spreads and it lends on itself. I think here we're talking about it being a little bit more, it's popping up. I think it's kind of what we're looking at here, that we're catching the commercial as, instead of it coming from a certain area and working its way into an area, this is kind of springing up. So I think maybe that's a way we could look at the purpose to sort of gather that.
Would you not use under consumer goods rental, consumer or contractor service limited, would you not use the word in front, limited? Because it's defined limited already. That's just a quick question. We have something that says limited, and this is going to be limited, so wouldn't you use the word limited there? And then this one.
So those everything you see up there is a definition. So if it doesn't have the word, for example, contractor services limited, that's a definition in your code. Consumer goods rental, it's a definition in your code. So the terms limited, they should orient you to being a smaller use, but they're actually already defined elsewhere in your code. So if you wanted to change the use a little bit, you could do that, but we'd be adding a definition instead. And consumer goods rental is a use primarily engaged in rental or leasing of new or used products such as electronics, appliances, formal wear, costume, recreational good, and the like to the general public, excluding vehicle or watercraft rentals.
Commissioner McElhaney had a comment.
A couple of things, to Commissioner Hersey's point about the bar, tavern, pub, and lounge. You've already got restaurants in there, and now a lot of your restaurants have bars inside them with big TVs where you can watch any game you want to watch. So I think leaving those in there, to me, just floods or could flood that area with something that we really don't want. And if these are closer to residential neighborhoods, I'm certainly, they probably don't want them either. And looking at mini warehouses, I'm not so sure I'd be okay with that unless it was something that was inside of a building, house type thing.
That was the one that I probably had the most, I just put it up there for y'all's conversation, which, by the way, let me be real clear. These are purely the starting point. But many warehouses, I do think, looking at your definition and judging what the commission has looked at for these types of intersections. I included it in there because I think we have approved some at these intersections. But I assumed that you would want to put more requirements around those, because I don't think you wanted to put a very, very big one in these areas. You're probably looking for something that services the residential areas nearby. So I could see there being some direction from the body about either a square footage limit or enhanced screening. I just assume there's going to be more for many warehouses in this use.
How would you describe a house that you have the storage in with its air conditioned and?
So many warehouses is the definition that you guys have. And it's defined as a building or group of buildings in a controlled access and secure compound that contains varying sizes of individual compartmentalized and controlled access stalls or lockers for the dead storage of customers' goods or wares. I don't really know what dead storage means.
What does that mean?
Now, would that include climate controlled, like, buildings and that
It would.
okay.
But I would assume that you would not want to have a big facility of one of those. Now, what is an appropriate size for that area? Not a question y'all have to answer today, but my guess is y'all were going to have something smaller than the biggest you could do.
I mean, you're talking about storage buildings is what you're talking about. And do we want a county full of storage buildings? I don't think so. I mean, I would eliminate that as a use. But let me come back to the general point. Why are we creating a new zone? We already have ordinances that allow for A, conditional use, B, a conditioned rezoning or zoning, okay? If we have a new zone and someone comes in and gets a zone for a clinic, okay? Well, maybe they change their mind and put in a brew pub. What's to prevent that? I mean, we would have to condition every one of these things that they would only do that, and if it ceases to occupy that particular facility, that it somehow reverts the zoning. Well, we know we can't reverse zoning, okay? But we can apply for a conditioned use. So if someone comes in and says, I want to build a veterinary clinic on the corner of such and such roads, you say, okay. But if you stop using that as a veterinary clinic and turn it into a brew pub, you're out of luck. You have to come back and get it conditioned, a conditioned use or a conditioned zoning for a brew pub. And we may or may not agree with that. So it just seems to me that we already have the tools in hand to restrict the kinds of uses in various areas. And what I think we need to do really is to identify those areas in which we are going to restrict the uses. That calls for picking winners and losers, and I'm not sure we can do that from the top down. I mean, what really happens is that someone is willing to risk their capital for a particular purpose because they think they can make a profit in a particular location with a particular usage. So they'll come in and apply for it. Well, we can condition the zoning on that. We can, if it goes from ag to C1 or R to C1 or, whatever it goes to. We can make that decision then on the basis that this particular facility must exist as described, or the use or zoning or whichever we come up with will be reversed.
But I think I may be misunderstanding this, but what I'm looking at is for somebody to come in, I know what I'm getting when I spend my money, and fixing, or either fixing to spend some money. I think what we're trying to do is set something up so people, when they do come in, they'll know where they stand at when they come and what they can and can't put there. If you can't put a brew pub there, there's no need in asking for it. I mean, that's the way I look at it. I mean, you know, if I'm kind of simple, I reckon, but if I'm going to breed to a Holstein bull and I can't get nothing but a Jersey bull, I just do without. And that's just the way I kind of look at things. You know, I think what we're trying to do is set something up so you'll have to go by what is there, not what can be made up.
Commissioner McElhaney had asked, and then you're next.
Are we, this goes on in other jurisdictions, correct? Am I wrong? Do other jurisdictions do things like this?
Certainly, yeah.
So we're not going out on a limb doing something like this then?
I think I've had this conversation, or I've opined that every jurisdiction that has zoning, you reach a point where your current ordinances don't meet what the market is asking or what development is dictating. And so naturally, I think I've said this a lot lately, these are living documents. I mean, I'd love for a zoning ordinance to be in place for a long time, but the government, local governments in particular, we're much more reactive to what the market does than being able to force it a certain way. So yes, sir, you will make changes. The more development you have, or the way trends change, the more likely you are to need to make changes. This idea, I think Commissioner Hersey's point is accurate. That is a way of addressing what's come in. I've said this to this commission before. You have to weigh the balance between having a developer who invests capital and possibly has the ability to bring a use against the surrounding areas that are impacted by that use, and where do you put the requirement? You know, when do you say that it must be what you presented it as is? I think Commissioner Hersey's point is that you could do that with all the time, and you could. I think that is. I think I've also told y'all that if you do go that route, you're significantly increasing the administration resources, demand on administration resources for the county, but that's obviously within y'all's purview. Another way would be to adopt either a new zoning district or overlay districts or other things. But I'm kind of rambling, but to your point, yes, this is what jurisdictions have to do. You have to look back and say, do our current ordinances meet both what is being brought into our county while also protecting the existing uses, both residential, agricultural, and commercial that are around it?
Is this not essentially an overlay district?
Pretty close. I think.
I know we talked about this in the past about trying to do that in certain areas so that we can control things.
I think that's not a bad way of describing it, but I think Commissioner Garrett has actually hit on the fact that what we're looking at here is when we have an area that is starting to have commercial growth that for the first time. And I think that's kind of the goal of this district. But there's a lot of ways to go about this problem. And it's a good problem. Let me be real clear on that too. I mean, I'm not here to give you all a pep talk, but there are several of my clients that I know the headaches that come with development are large, and I was lobbied on the way in about the conditions of the roads, like I am every time I come in here. But these are challenges that y'all have to meet because you're getting the resources. So I don't think, I think you just got really hard decisions to make, and I believe what we're putting forth is what we're trying to rein in, but just know there's more than one way to go about this. There's several different opportunities, and this is just the one that I've heard the board talk about, but y'all want to go in a different direction too, we can certainly try that.
Commissioner Garrett?
Yeah, I mean, to address Commissioner Hersey's question as to why we're doing this, I think the reason it makes sense to do it is because right now our code doesn't distinguish between areas of mature commercial development and areas of immature or even zero commercial development. And I think it would offer some clarity to developers. It would not avoid entirely, but minimize the need for case-by-case conditional zoning, which I think could get unwieldy pretty quickly. And I think it's a separate question whether in this zone, because it is immature development, have more stipulations, hold developers to what they say they're going to do, so they don't just do a bait and switch and we suddenly end up with something else. But there may be a case for that in our zoning generally, but then I suppose equally if we keep coming across this problem, then maybe our uses by right are too broadly framed in some cases, and that's where we need to focus our energy rather than case by case conditions. But I do think we need a district that acknowledges the different circumstances of brand new development. And just as this list indicates, there's certain things we want and certain things we don't want. And right now we don't have that distinction. And I don't think tackling it by case conditional use would be very pragmatic.
I wanted to ask a question, and maybe I misunderstood this, but we brought the maps down here, and I thought we were going to look at some specific crossroads and say, this ordinance will affect these crossroads, and go on and define them. And I thought that's why we had the maps, but I could be wrong.
Yes, sir. I think the first question was to talk through the ordinance and then to look. But again, I think the idea here is we're trying to get, if this is what the body wants to do, where would it be done? So, yes, sir. And that's what the maps are there for. I don't want to monopolize too much of the time on just the crossroads because y'all got several other things to talk about too. But I did identify this as the one that I thought would take the most conversation. So I certainly think this is...
So could I ask a question? Who is going to make the decision? Is that this board is going to dictate what people are going to risk their capital in?
I think
in various locations?
I think that, yes, you as the Board of Commissioners would have to make a decision on these zonings.
Commissioner Wooten?
We're going to look at maps and designate that this crossroad or that crossroad or this area is, only going to be a CC zone?
You could.
Is that what you're saying?
I think that's the goal here, but there's no requirement that you do it against the will of the property owner.
I thought that one of the things that we had discussed in our last work session was the notion of trying to preserve green space by having high-density housing and then associated with it some kind of extended green space, parks, walking trails, this kind of thing, not where the front yard of a dwelling counts as green space, but public available green space. You go to various other places and you'll find that there is amenities involving green space, such as parks and other recreational walking trails, etc. And I thought that's what we were going to try to do with an overlay, not to create another zone, but rather to accommodate where we have higher density housing in exchange for this public, if you will, green space, or even if it's restricted to the inhabitants of that particular area. But that's what I thought we were going to work on. I didn't think we were going to become dictators of how you can risk your capital and where you can risk it.
Well, I mean, my take on that question is, I mean, our zoning already decides some things are allowed in some zones and some things are not allowed in other zones, and I just see this as a development of that. We shouldn't be in the business of picking winners in the absolute sense, but we're trying to balance the interests of developers with the interest of with the public interest.
Well, a couple of things. We are eating an elephant here, so this was the first bite. I think some of the things that Commissioner Hersey brought up will be addressed, some of the other uses. But I think the way that this makes sense based on what I've heard the commission's conversation be about is that when someone comes to rezone property at one of these intersections, you are going to identify ones that you could prospectively zone CC, but when they come to you and they ask that we want to put something there, instead of making it a C1, which would open it up to an awful lot of uses, you could limit it to CC. So that way the neighbors know that, well, what will be next to me will be one of those things that are listed up there. Because currently C1 and C1 and relatively intensive. If you're coming from Greensboro and you're driving down the state highway, there's a lot of C1 in that area. And then as you come off of those roads in the developed areas, that's where you start seeing the C2. I think the idea here was that when someone comes, like I think we've got an agenda item tonight, rezoning tonight, that would probably be a pretty good candidate for CC. To Commissioner Hersey's point on the green space, I don't want to stop this conversation, but one of the next item that we were going to discuss was the PUD ordinance, because I know there's been an awful lot of conversation about the PUD ordinance. And I identified that as one that if you do allow for a higher density in the PUD, we should probably ask for a greater amenity for that. But again, this is, I've got 6 or 7 different ordinances to put before y'all to have conversations about. And I realized that when I was looking through my notes and trying to prepare for this work session, a lot of our conversations were much more aspirational. Like, how do we get better, how do we get more dense around the current density around Eatonton, and how do we push it away? And those aren't things that I can necessarily do just with ordinances. So I guess what I'm trying to do is put together what the things we can tackle immediately, and then long-term out, how you're going to plan for these other things.
Commissioner Wooten has for the floor there.
Yep, I'm just, on the convenience store, the maximum of 6 gas pumps, would that be fuel stations? Like, is it gonna be 6 gas pumps, or could one of them be a diesel pump, or you're just looking for fuel stations?
I just put a number there to get the conversation started.
Right.
Y'all tell me what you want to, if you wanted to include it to
Okay,
be
so
gas,
so
diesel.
it can be diesel,
I
gas.
think
or-
what I heard several people say is that they did not want to have a Buc-ee's move in next to one of these intersections.
I
Or
agree-
a truck stop. 8.
I agree with that, but like I said, with the ruralness of it is the way it is today, or if most people got these little mini farms now, they want to run and get them 5 gallons of diesel. And they don't want to have to go all the way to town to Rose Sea Oil to get the 5 gallons of diesel. So I was just wondering about on that aspect of it.
Just change it to 8 fuel pumps instead of
Yeah,
gas.
okay, there you go.
Let's say fuel pump.
Okay, thank you.
Agree? And he says 8, so.
Let me ask our attorney a question. Tonight, we're going to deal with what I consider a recommendation from Planning and Zoning that conditions rezoning. Assuming the board accepts that condition, the proviso is that if the individual does not comply with the original plan, that the zoning disappears, that it reverts. Is that legal?
So the way zoning conditions work, I've had this conversation before. I don't believe that you could necessarily make it go back to the original zoning, because the Zoning Procedures Act, state law requires a process to do that. What it does, though, is it makes it a violation of your ordinances, and it's a daily penalty. So if somebody, say for instance, you put a condition that says you will not operate after 9 o'clock, and they operate past 9 o'clock, every day that they do that is another day of penalty that you can go to magistrate court and seek a penalty. You can also go to Superior Court to enjoin that use too. The idea of it reverting back to the zoning, I don't know that I could tell you definitively what the courts would say about this, but the best argument I could come up with is that you would have to rezone the property. You, the Board of Commissioners, would have to take the action of doing that. But the idea of conditions are supposed to be no different than the regulations that you have in your ordinances. So it's ordinance-specific rules to that piece of property.
So what you're saying is that to reverse a zoning decision, basically, we would end up in court.
It takes action of the Board of Commissioners. If there's no action in compliance with the Zoning Procedures Act, I would have a very hard time defending that the zoning is different.
So would we not be better off using a conditional use rather than a rezoning?
I think conditional uses are, especially putting conditions on property, are an effective way of addressing the gaps in your ordinances. So, you have maybe 8 zoning districts in Putnam County. I can't imagine that every one of those zoning districts is going to provide all the coverage and protection that adjacent uses need from those uses. So there are times where conditions can fill the gaps. So yes, it would be great if everything that got used would have a condition that it be used a certain way. What you run up against are, I think, twofold. One is, do we have the resources to condition each one? And two, does an investor or a developer want to be that limited? And that's a question for this body, and which goes back to your overall question.
Well, here we have a proposed new zone, which has multiple uses allowed in it as a matter of right. And if we simply do a rezoning without placing a condition on it, that it be used as stated in the application, we still end up with the zone, and anybody can, as a matter of right, use it any way they please under the allowed uses.
If someone came to you and said that I'd like to rezone this portion of property to CC, and I propose to do a child daycare center, we go through the process, we rezone the property, and it, for whatever reason, doesn't move forward, that person could sell the property and then open a
Brew pub.
I'm trying to find the least offensive use I can, but you took all the alcohol ones away. But a construction office. Yes, that's the zones that you said. I think the difference here is that if it was C1, that list would be much bigger. If it was C2, it would be even bigger than that. But really, we're talking through the same question here.
It would be the same outcome, right?
Correct.
I mean, if we condition the zoning on doing what the individual says they are planning to do, and then they change their mind,
they would have to come back. So for example, in my examples, I came to you, I said I wanted to do a child daycare center. I got approval, but you conditioned that it only be a child daycare center,
But we would still,
I'd have to come back if I wanted to do
if
something
we
different.
if we did it by zoning, a conditioned zoning, we would still have to go to court to claim that they have violated the ordinance and therefore are due a daily fine.
Well, if, say for instance, we condition on child daycare center and then the next person comes in and says, I would like to get a building permit to build something different, we just wouldn't issue the building permit because the zoning doesn't allow it. I mean, we'd be in a fight, but it's no different than if I started a
But
restaurant at my house.
if it's an allowed use and we refuse to issue the building permit,
No, if we don't condition the zone and as long as they pick something on there, then yes, sir, they could move forward.
it just seems to me again that what we are looking at is using either a conditional use, that is something which is not in the allowed use in that zone, but we are going to allow it, or we're looking at a conditioned rezoning, so we place something in a C1 or in this case a CC, on the condition that they do what they said they were going to do. I mean, have we never had an occurrence where someone has changed their mind once they've gotten a particular zoning? Have we never learned our lesson about that?
That constantly happens. It seems to...
And it shouldn't.
It seems to me that the CC, the new thing, would just limit the thinking of whoever the developer is. A guy buys the corner lot and it's CC, then he knows he can do A, B, C, D. And that makes it a little more convenient than to say, well, it's C1 and you can do 5,000 things. If it's CC, you can do 10 things. You've already narrowed it down.
Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Wooten.
I see it coming to District 4 with all the crossroads, undeveloped crossroads. And I think we do really need this to control and have some kind of control over there. If a developer comes to Miss Lisa and says, look, I'd love to put such and such right here. Well, we got if it's CC, and I think we need to start out with CC and control it in a way that we can pick what goes there. Because it's so much potential there in District 4 now with undeveloped crossroads. I think we just about passed up on everything. I mean, just about done in District 3. I might be wrong, but coming around through Pea Ridge and Twin Bridges, we got a lot of crossroads there. On Scuffleboro, we got some on Dennis Station, and it's a lot of potential there where we can pick more what we want and make it fit into the undeveloped part of the District 4. Thank you.
Other comments?
Well, I think we ought to put in the back of our minds at least that no matter what zone we rezone something into, whether it's CC or C1 or C2 or industrial, whatever, that we ought to condition it. That someone has to do what they say they were going to do, or they are in violation of our ordinance. And let's go to court with it. In terms of this thing, I say we need to get rid of the mini warehouse thing. I don't want to see storage buildings on every corner in Putnam County.
Can't argue that.
It's poorly defined in our ordinance as to what a mini warehouse is, but smaller they are, the worse they are.
Yeah, I'd be fine with getting rid of the warehouses as well.
Commissioner McElhaney, yeah, right?
Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I agree with Commissioner Hershey. I'd be fine with doing that as well.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
is there a reason why we don't have coffee shop retail on here? Is that a deliberate exclusion?
Coffee shop would be a restaurant, would it not?
I'll have to look. I think
I
I think Commissioner, that was intended to be in there, but let me check.
I definitely will, coffee
But
shop.
more general retail, clothing store,
Retail,
bookstore?
yeah, that was the intention, but let me confirm. If it's not, I'll make sure that use was included in there.
Okay.
Because retail, boutique shops, coffee
Right.
shops, yes, sir.
So if we decided you want to take bar, tavern, and pub lounge and brew pub out,
What if we made them with food?
Well,
You know,
That's
defined
restaurant
defined in a certain way.
well, here's what I see you running into. The bar, tavern, pub, lounge, usually their hours are 4 o'clock to 2 a.m. And if you got a residential backing up to that, they're not going to hear all that.
All you have to do is condition their hours of operation.
And so then you have to send somebody out there to monitor it every day.
The sheriff's deputy drives past it every day.
Well, we got 2 of them doing the whole county. I don't think they got time for that.
Hopefully, we'll hire more. We certainly budget for more.
so what have we decided here?
I think, to Commissioner Garrett's point, I do think retail sales or services indoor, that's a term that y'all have. I do think that would be one, though, that you need to have a conversation, because that would include grocery stores. And is that one that you want to make a smaller use? Because I think a retail shop would be directly, its size would directly relate to how much traffic comes to it. And again, we're not trying to increase the traffic, we're trying to service what's already there. But I'll include that use along with the animal care ones. We'll include retail services, sales and service indoor, and then y'all be thinking about if you wanted to put some limitations on that.
Commissioner Wooten?
I'm gonna make one last point on the convenience stores. Just about every convenience store now has a little table, 2 or 3 tables back there, and a breakfast, dinner, and most of which I call dinner. That's the midday meal. Supper is the last meal of the day. They serve that. So would that just be still considered a convenience store, or would that be considered how would that be defined? Because all the jets and the marathons now have a little cafeteria, you might well say.
So your definition of convenience store, it says this may include limited food preparation. It doesn't speak to what limited food preparation is, but I would suggest that would allow for what you're speaking to.
Okay, I just
And
want to
that's
make
usually where I have to eat after these meetings, so
Oh,
I need those to exist.
Hey, me too.
And Commissioner, I don't want to stop, but I do want to recognize, maybe just to keep our time valuable, y'all are going to have a break between 5 and 6. I'd love for y'all to go look at those maps and tell everybody about it, but it may be more useful for us to do that after the meeting and keep conversations going about the ordinances, because I think I've got several more I wanted to get through. Another thing too, at the end of this, it would be helpful if we identify which ones we want to bring to table, because this one is the one that I think over the past 2 years, we've had several of these come up. So I think this one's pretty, it's the one that probably needs to be thought of first. So that's why we identified it.
Have we identified anything on any of these maps that we're restricting them to only be a zone?
Well, all of
I
them.
mean, is there some place on one of these maps where you can only have a C2 facility?
No, I want to be clear. I don't necessarily see that y'all would take action as a result of this. We're just identifying for our purposes where we're thinking of this use going. If you wanted to reach out to those owners of that land and say, we'll zone you to CC, we could. But I think the concept here is to be thinking about what it would look like if someone made that request.
Suppose a landowner wants a C1.
Y'all could have that conversation. I think the idea here is that you're creating CC to tell both the landowner and the world, this is what we want in these areas. But they could come in and say, I want to make it industrial. I've always thought that the zoning arm of the government, we have to respond. So if someone walked in and said, I'd like to build a hog rendering plant next to us, we'd have to take the application, even if everybody would come out against it. So they could certainly request. I think the idea here is that when you're creating this ordinance, you're thinking, and this is where we're kind of thinking this stuff would be.
So the idea is that eventually we are going to identify certain areas that you can only rezone to a CC.
No, to Commissioner Garrett's point, I think the idea here is this is orienting us because we've gotten these requests, but you could do CC anywhere. You're not going to limit it to a certain area. Unless y'all would like to do something, I would suggest you probably don't.
But we're talking about crossroads.
Or, as Commissioner Garrett said, maybe
and identifying certain crossroads where you can only have a CC.
I think the idea here is to look and see, does this use meet what we're thinking in our heads? Because y'all have identified 12 to 13 different thoroughfares and intersections y'all have brought up in these meetings. And my idea would be look at those and then look at what you've written there and say, does that make sense to you? But no, Commissioner, you would not be limiting those uses. For instance, if it never develops and it remains ag, it could just be ag forever. I think the concept here is you're actually trying to put into practice, looking at it, what would this actually look like as opposed to just a theoretical.
But what you're saying is that if someone comes and says, okay, let's say we eliminated the mini warehouses from the CC district. Someone comes and says that at such and such a crossroad, I want to put in storage buildings. We would say no.
I don't know what y'all would do or who would be sitting in your place, but I do know that if you did say no and you had this use in place, I could better defend you in court because we're saying to everybody, these areas we're trying to protect against these uses.
But
So-
do you get paid extra to go to court?
No, unfortunately, it's the same rate.
Oh,
So
No overtime.
no overtime. If I did, y'all would be the ones to
I'm
to do it
still
with.
I'm still struggling with why we are creating a new zone if we already have the tools to deny a request if we think it's not suitable for that particular area.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I mean, I would say the reason we're doing it is because right now, without something like a CC district, we don't have sufficient direction, clarity for developers, for property owners, that signal that we think this kind of development is more appropriate for this kind of circumstance. They can still make their case, but I think it would be much easier for us to deny something in a certain area with this on the books than without it. Because as you rightly say, we've struggled to constrain what at least some of us have considered inappropriate development.
You're saying at this crossroads, we're not going to approve any C1.
No, I don't think we're saying that. What I hear us saying is that the creation of, right, I mean, I assume we would begin with this on our books with no land in Putnam County designated CC, right? But it would signal to property owners if what I want to rezone, because this by definition would be rezoning, if my property right now resembles what they're describing as a CC district, it's pretty clear to me that I'm going to have more luck with these proposals, and I'm going to be out of luck with those proposals. And then gradually, we would start to get parcels designated CC, and that would start to create precedents. And I'm sure over the long term, something might graduate from CC to C1 if it's developed to a certain stage. This is about nurturing development at a certain stage, not about necessarily capping it there for all time.
As we grow, as time changes, things change. And this allows you to have something. This is a tool in your toolbox to help. We're gonna move.
So I'll continue the conversations. Those convenience stores still do food prep, so I'll sit here as long as y'all want to after the meeting tonight. The next one, I think that I have a list of different ordinances, but the one I wanted to put some attention to that's had a lot lately is the what I would refer to as the energy creation, energy storage, and digital infrastructure. So this is the data centers, the battery storage, and the solar farms.
Very good.
So presently in your ordinances, you have a chapter that is dedicated to just solar farm regulation. Commissioner Hersey had mentioned that he wanted to have a standalone chapter for these uses. For convenience, I've put them all into one. So solar, battery storage, and data centers. Some of this stuff I've created is, these are just the words that I came up with. Y'all feel free to make any changes you'd like to, but what I've done is I've created a set of regulations for each of these uses. So it's based off of what you had in your solar ordinances. I know that there may be some changes from the body about what they want to do with the solar currently, but I kind of kept that as is for now with the understanding that we as a body may discuss it. Presently, y'all allow solar in certain uses, but you allow it as accessory use in every use. The first question for this body is if you want to continue that or not. Home use of solar still exists, so that probably is something that you wanted to keep in there, but I wanted to highlight it for you. In the definitions section, this is where you had all your definitions for solar farm. I've also included the definitions that are most commonly found in battery storage and data centers ordinances. So you'll have some new definitions. Each of these are talking about either components or regulations that you're going to be holding the developments to. Just to be clear, everybody understands that the underlined sections are new. They're the ones that have been added in. So if we'll keep scrolling through the definition section. So the data center development, decommissioning, these are all just terms that will be referenced later on in the ordinances. If we keep going through the solar, it pretty much stays as is. Again, I want to hear from the board if you're happy with the way solar is currently done. Specifically, the next section lays out the use table for solar. So if you'll scroll to that, Mercy. Yeah, it should be a chart there. And that's what y'all are currently allowing. Your solar uses, you guys do it based off of the size in certain areas. That plays a role and whether or not that's currently meeting our requirements or not. One housekeeping note, y'all did have some older zones in that chart that we would take out that we no longer have on the books. If you'll keep scrolling through, you guys have certain requirements for your solar farms that include construction standards. Those haven't changed. Those will stay the same. At least for purposes of our today. Y'all can make any changes you want to them. If you'll keep going to there's one thing I want to point out. For solar farms and now this proposal for battery storage and for data centers, you would have to get a separate permit. So in addition to get a building permit, you would also have to apply for a solar farm permit or a battery storage permit or a data center permit. It's another level of regulation that we have in place to ensure that they're following all the rules that we have in place and that they keep following them after they get it. We'll keep going, Mercy. One thing to point out in this section here, in the abandonment removal, currently y'all do have the requirement that there be a decommissioning plan and that there be some security for the decommissioning of a solar farm. There have been some changes in state law regarding the ability of local governments to place bonds on those. I don't tell you that we need to change anything. I tell you for two reasons. One, some of this ordinance may have been preempted by state law, and it would be on a case-by-case basis. And secondly, there have been other proposed legislation in the state house, or excuse me, the state legislature, that may take all this away. So if it does, you'll be aware of it. But the decommissioning of solar farms, currently you have, what you can do, you've done. But I bring that up to you to say that right now there are some conversations around taking away our ability to continue to make sure that when the solar farm is no longer operable, that it's returned to its state before its construction. You'll keep going, Mercy. I took out the appeals section. I would suggest that we just handle these the same way we do all your zoning uses. The appeals section, I think, was conflicted a bit, so I took that out. And then the penalty section would remain, the renumbering. If you'll scroll, Mercy, to battery storage. So the first question, again, just so everybody understands that we have a definition now for battery storage, and these are systems. I haven't had a client, well, I told y'all my Burke County adopted their ordinances the second Tuesday of this month, and they now have an application for a battery storage system. Essentially what these units, these developments are, is they pull power either from the creation of power, say a solar farm or some other electric production facility, or they pull it from the grid and they store power and put it back onto the grid at certain times of the day. I just took what I thought I heard, but this is completely up for you guys to decide where you want to allow these operations to exist. I think battery storage and data centers are probably pretty similar in use and their impact around the others. I do think there might be, I would assume there is less foot traffic to a battery storage center than there is to a data center. But otherwise, and on their size, I think battery storage centers can be much smaller than a data center, but that's for you guys to decide. These are just really placeholders for you to have conversations about. If you'll
Can I just interject something? I don't see why we would prohibit a battery storage center in a C1 or a C2 area. These are not noise-producing entities. And they are, well, they have to somehow be hooked to the grid in some fashion in order to charge the batteries or whatever devices they're using. So it seems to me that they're perfectly fine in a C1 or even a C2 or a C1 for that matter. And we might include them in our CC.
start a daycare and then do a battery storage center instead.
I don't think they fit in CC.
I think your key point. That's right. Well, you can't, the bar. You could do a bar / battery storage center. C1 and C2, I think you are correct, Commissioner, that I think the biggest thing for a battery system is that it has to have access to the infrastructure to put it back on the grid. And so you might see it closer to in jurisdiction, or excuse me, zones that have electric use. So that's fine. Again, this was just really a placeholder. I assumed that you wouldn't want it in the residentials, but we can certainly add it into C1, C2. Mercy, if you'll.
Do we even have a village district anymore?
Is village district out?
We don't have a village district.
Yeah, so we took out some of them, but not all of them. So because you had some leftovers on your books. Currently, you still have RM2, C3, a few others that need to be deleted.
What does public mean? I mean, I may be
So public's not a zone, but it's a publicly owned, so whether it be the county, city, state entity, federal government, which y'all have, it's a deeper legal question about what you can regulate or can't regulate there.
So in
As
other
I
words,
underst-
public could be this building and our land here, and we could put it here based on this.
Yeah, but your ability to regulate through zoning public uses is pretty limited.
Our ordinance says that any public lands are exempt from standards. So
I mean, you could take, you don't have to have that
we
included.
could put a data center in the empty space back here. It'd create a buzz all during the meeting, but that's okay.
No, no buzz.
It doesn't-
Um,
They don't buzz. Don't buzz.
So 5313 are the requirements for the operation of battery storage centers. I don't mind telling y'all that I borrowed heavily from my other jurisdiction, but these are the standards that they worked with, both with a proposed battery storage operator and looking at their own, they did their own research on what they could find as far as certain adopted codes regarding installation and construction of these uses. The lot size that Burke decided on was 5 acres, but no more than 75, and they had a height of 20 foot. Again, that wouldn't include any of the connections and substations. You'll see an awful lot of references to certain codes. I know that's what the chief is back there looking at. But these are developed codes that deal with the wiring of batteries, the storage of batteries, and they're specifically related to those. It's intended to make sure that development not only is developed that way, but also continues to operate in compliance with those codes. Some of the other provisions in there deal with your access to the site, that everything be underground as much as possible, that it not be used for really any other use other than battery storage. And then if you look at subsection G and below, that is the setback requirements, the ability that we would put around how close you could be to other uses. That is what they decided upon. I could see us being, and perhaps for if we were going to do it in C1 and C2, you might want additional regulations. But all of this is just sort of the standard fare for screening and setbacks away from these types of uses. I wanted to highlight a couple of things, that there are some requirements for the lighting, that we don't want it to be have an impact on the surrounding properties. And one thing that we spent a lot of time in Burke discussing is number 9, that if these, for whatever reason, if there was some type of emergency response necessary, we wanted to have as developed a possible plan to respond to, say, a fire, including things, if we were to have to put a bunch of water on it, where does that water go? Do we maintain as much, if there are some types of chemicals or materials on site, we want to keep them on site. So it was requiring the homework up front in case something happens. It would also include the requirement that a decommissioning plan be included in the same way that you do for solar farms. If you'll keep scrolling, the thing I think we've had a lot of, again, same thing, you have a permit, so just like you would for the solar farm. And then a provision that if you'll keep scrolling, Mercy, that there's been a lot of conversations about would be sound and lighting. So we wanted, now I want to be real clear, I don't know what impact these have one way or the other. And I know that if you read news articles about battery storage and data centers, it seems like one of the biggest things people have issues with are both lighting and sound. So we're just mandating, this is what Burke County came up with, that appears to be within the realm of what is reasonable for the operation of these. If they're quieter or louder than that, I don't know, but this is what the industry seems to say that they can abide by.
Question: do we have equipment that can measure the sound? Right now, we don't have a sound ordinance that can detect.
Anytime you're going to put a sound requirement or limitation in place, there will be an administration side of confirming that you actually, because think about all these ordinances, it goes back to what Commissioner Hershey said. I have to walk into a courtroom and say this person violated the ordinance, and I have to do that to the satisfaction of the court. So yes, you would need to have something that I could put up to say this is when this use was in excess of our decibel limit. But getting it in place, I think, is step one. And then obviously at the same time, step 2 would be how do we enforce? So I would have to defer to Paul if he's got an odometer. Yeah.
I am assuming that all of this will be provided to commissioners.
Oh, yes, sir.
for-
I apologize for not getting it to you faster. The intention was to get it out, but I wanted to also hear from the commissioners before we send a product out. And to be very clear, I want it to be as good as we can with what the board wants before it goes too far out. I mean, we're going to take a lot of public comment on this, but I wanted you guys to have an opportunity to put a product or something that looks close to what you want before we go live. But yes, sir, at the end of this,
If-
everybody will have
If
this.
you could send this out, and also the CC thing, so that we can send you back comments on it, and some things may get changed, may not. In general, my concern has mainly to do with the solar farm business. I do not want to see Putnam County have a 3,000-acre solar farm. Period. I mean, if we look at, okay, so there is a need for more energy production. How did the Facebook data center acquire the amount of electricity that they are going to need and use? Well, they acquired it by building a solar farm in South Georgia, putting that electricity on the grid, and the grid fed it then to the data center in Covington or Conyers, wherever it is. So there are perhaps places where energy generation is appropriate. I think it is not appropriate on a large scale in Putnam County, and I would like to see some acreage limits on solar installations, if you will, that are supplying the grid. A 5-acre solar farm, if you will, if you call it a farm, but a 5-acre solar installation, ground installation, with the kinds of devices that are now available, is sufficient to supply most buildings. And I don't, without having to go to the grid for the use of it. If they have it together with a battery storage facility, most buildings can go on their own. Data centers, no, but most operations can operate with that. So I would like to see perhaps a limit of 5 acres, excluding any buffers that are necessary around a solar installation, but limit solar installations, ground installations, to 5 acres. So we're not supplying the grid. If a facility wants to have a self-sustaining electrical supply, 5 acres should be sufficient for them to operate most businesses. So, as I said before, I think it's critical that we move forward with some kind of regulation to let data centers or prospective data centers know that we are open to having them, but at the same time that there will be some regulation, and they can decide if the regulations are too onerous for them or not. But once we get this and allow the board members to review it and make suggestions, I think hopefully sometime in January, well, we'll come to that discussion shortly, but
I figured we'd just go all the way and just keep going, but data centers is next. So if we'll keep scrolling, data centers has the same question about where you want to put those in the use table. And again, I just put enough up there to get the conversation started. But that would obviously be a very big question for this body. Data center requirements. So these requirements are based off of what I found from a couple of other jurisdictions. I think we started with Bartow County, who has an ordinance in place for data centers. This one had a little bit different. They had a little bit more of the buffer requirements, a little bit, obviously they're a little bit taller than the battery storage, but we tried to keep the same format for how they are built in the same fashion as the solar farms. The regulations around the solar farms. But each one of these things has certain requirements about setbacks and buffers, security fencing, lighting. If you'll scroll through, Mercy. And these are technical, but obviously there's some questions for the body. If you, to Commissioner Hersey's point, I don't expect you to be able to tell us right now that you're okay with minimum lot frontage of 110 feet. But these are the standards that I found these particular standards to be very common for the jurisdictions that have adopted ordinances. Of the highlight, it would also include a decommissioning plan. So the same way as the solar farms, once it stops, there needs to be some conversation about how it gets back to its original use. Again, it would include an application for a permit. So another level of requirement that they follow whatever ordinances you put in place. Same thing with the sound and lighting. These are similar to the battery storage units. So the idea here is that both of these are not intended to stop the operation, but they're intended to have a minimal impact on the surrounding properties around it. And the penalty section is the same as the others. There's a lot of details within those operations, but obviously I wanted the body to see them, and this is what other jurisdictions have done. If there are specifics that other ones need to include, that's fine. Commissioner Garrett had provided me a copy of the model ordinance that he's seen, and I'm still in the process of assuring that they track, but I believe I have confirmed that everything in there is at least addressed in this one. But obviously, anybody who wants to can hold those against one another. Again, I think for this body, the most important conversation, although I don't want to belittle the idea of how they're built, I think it's probably more important about where they're built. That seems to be the first question that this body will have to consider. And to Commissioner Hersey's point, if, for instance, you put a data center and you say you only want to allow it in the industrial zones, remember that if you zone it industrial without condition, it could be a data center or something else allowed in industrial. So I think, to Commissioner Hersey's point, a data center, something that's going to take up a lot of use and be very intensive, that one is probably one that it wouldn't be that difficult to zone condition to be a data center only. I think that's probably what you'll find a lot of these operations are. But again, every jurisdiction is different, and where they find themselves is different too. So
You could say a data center until decommissioned. If it's decommissioned or moved, then you could.
you could. I mean, if you're going to zone something industrial, usually you have that all around the industrial uses, and you've already, as a county, decided to move things away from that area that are residential or agricultural. But I guess my point is that in an industry that I don't know is fully developed on where and how these things operate, I'm a little bit more hesitant to give more range. And especially when you think about the amount of the cost of these facilities. I think if a developer's coming in, they're probably not speculating as much as they are building. So I think it might be an opportunity for us to give assurance that will be what it actually will, what they say it's going to be. But again, that's a case-by-case basis.
There are speculators out there.
There are, but if you need the amount of money you need to build if you came to me with an investment opportunity and it was to build a data center, we'd have to get a lot more people together before we could go any further.
Understand?
The only thing I would say about data centers is that we should put somewhere in the ordinance that the contractor, builder, owner, whatever the entity is called, needs vetting. This is kind of a new thing, and I'm not sure that there aren't fly-by-night, if you will, Irish travelers building data centers around the state. So I would like to see that there's something in there that requires, maybe in the permitting process or whatever, that the contractors or whoever's building it shows a previous history of success. I mean, that's all. I mean, I don't want a new company coming in and saying, well, we can build a.
Well, and I've kind of gone over them quickly, but for these three uses, the application process, we could include, the county manager brought up financial viability, those kind of things. I think we could include that in that process. And remember, a little different than normal uses, you will have to do additional work in order to get the permit to do these types of uses. So yes, now there may be some limitations on how far we can dig, but my suggestion would be we try to push as far as we can, considering the amount of investment that we're going to be getting.
The financial responsibilities are a great big thing. I agree with Commissioner.
Well, I think one of the problems is if you wouldn't want to have something built 90% of the way and then 10% be off, and it'd be difficult. We have a building or a use that has an awful lot of resources dedicated to it that's never actually functioning.
Commissioner, go ahead.
Just a question about, I know another common concern about data centers is and maybe it's in here, but I don't think you referenced it, the draw on the local power supply, the impact on consumer bills. I think that should be something we should understand from the get-go.
I agree, and I think there's going to be a lot of questions raised by the public, and I think whoever decides that they want to be the person who makes the first request for this will have a lot of questions to answer. I'm not qualified to even speak to it. I have been told that the same drain, we're all drinking out of the same straw when it comes to power. So a data center in our county I've been told, doesn't have the same impact it has the same impact as one in our county. Now, whether or not that's true or not, I don't know. But I agree with you that whoever comes into the community to make this request, rightfully so, will have a lot of questions to answer. And don't get me wrong, it's very rare that we have a use come to us that we don't have some indication of. But, I couldn't even begin to tell you how the impacts beyond what we normally worry about are traffic patterns and noise and property value nearby. I couldn't tell you a question like that, but I think it's one worth asking.
If I may, 2 weeks ago, I went to a conference with the Chamber of Commerce, and the CEO of Georgia Power was there. And she said that it's a myth. It does not drain. It has no impact on the rates whatsoever. She also said that she would be willing, or a representative would be really willing to come and speak to the community in regards to data center and the impact that it has on utilities.
Yeah, I think that the supply of electricity to a data center may seem large, but when you take into account how much Georgia Power actually generates on a daily basis, it's not that much. But I also would echo the county attorney's opinion that it doesn't matter whether the power is used in Putnam County or Screven County. It all pulls from the same grid. And it's Georgia Power's responsibility to supply that. They also have to approve a data center or any substantial user of electricity before it can actually come through the county, so I'm not
Commissioner
worried
Mackel?
about.
Commissioner McElhaney?
So, what was it, about several months ago, I went with ACCG on their mobile classroom. And one of the places we went was to the Georgia Transmission, something or other in Tucker, where they actually have all the switches and control all the lines. And that question came up about the data centers. And the person that was talking kind of laughed and said, we have no problem with power. All we do is change things around and you get everything you need. So again, that is a myth, according to them.
Water and power were the only two things that I had heard, and we don't take anything from the aquifer here. And the EPSWA has surplus, so I don't know that water would be a problem here either.
Chad, you know,
Jeff?
a good example of what we're talking about would be the project that they're doing down at Georgia Power. That is a well thought out project, and when we visited, I don't think nobody but probably me and you were on the board at the time. Did you go? When they had the meeting down there and we toured everything.
Commissioner Garrett and I actually went and had a separate.
Oh, y'all had a separate one when you got on? Yeah. And, you know, everything was there. They had everything in line, the plan, the gas line. They had everything. And I don't think anybody's going to come in here half-witted about this. They're going to have pretty much all the questions already answered because they've had these questions already asked so many times, like in Burke County. I think we can get the questions answered that we'll have. I think they'll become prepared, and I think it's going to be a good thing. I got approached about one here the other week, and we have no regulation for it right now, and it's in a great place. The community supports it, so that's where we're at right now. We could probably get one, just as a battery storage facility, as soon as we can get something in place.
We need to get this moved along.
Yes, sir.
I've got a few more that I wanted to get in front of y'all, but then I will send, everything will get sent out to the commissioners. But there's a couple more I wanted to have some just conversations about. The next one is a theme that Commissioner Hersey has already brought up. The idea of site zone conditioning. So I've got two proposals. So this is in your current ordinance, section 66-165. I have, if you'll scroll to the bottom first, Mercy, the first highlighted section. One thing I've heard Commissioner Hersey say at the bottom, that one. If you wanted to site plan, zone, or condition, every rezoning, you could. So you would include that a requirement of when the Board of Commissioners makes a decision on rezoning, that it only be the use that the applicant has requested. That's one option. It goes to what we talked about, and I think all the issues related to doing that, or the way you have to implement that. And I don't want to beat the horse, but I think this is the way you would do it if this is what you wanted to include. And you could include in there that the site plan also be a part of that too, but I think that's where we would approach this if that's what the board wanted to do. If you'll scroll up to the another option that I've brought up, whether or not it makes sense, would be currently these are the factors that both you and the Board of Planning Commission is supposed to review before you make a decision on rezoning. And maybe a half measure would be that whenever someone makes a rezoning request, that this factor be considered. And when I say be considered, it means that staff must include this in their report. And this kind of goes to the idea that there may be some uses that proposed rezonings that you want to be more speculative about and let the market dictate. And then there may be some uses that you want to condition at that spot. Y'all's choice. I would suggest you're doing one or the other. If you're going to go with the requirement that all be conditioned on the use, we'd probably change that. We'd probably take that one out or maybe change it a little bit. But this is kind of the factor I think that we've been talking about. And so the idea here would be, if I'm a developer or I decide I want to rezone some property, the first thing I would do is open up this code section and read through the factors. And good developers, or ones who want to present well to the board, will go through each of those factors and try to answer them. And if a staff member is meeting with somebody who has a proposed use, they could say, well, look, we're going to be asked this question: should the rezoning be conditioned for just this use? And staff could say, and we would recommend that it would, or we would recommend that it wouldn't. Or the person who's making the request could say, okay, well, I will condition it on that. Kind of like the data center we talked about. I'm assuming that they would come in and say, yeah, we want it just to be a data center. This kind of gets to the heart of what Commissioner Hersey has been discussing. And so I think, again, this would be where I would start your conversation about whether or not we want to require all rezonings be what is actually put in the application, or do we want it just to be a factor, or do you want to not do this at all? You could take all these things out, and if it's working for the board as is now, then don't change any of it.
Go back to the other, 9 or number 2.
Yeah, 2 would be, so that is where you make your decisions, and I think that's where if you wanted to make a requirement of the Board of Commissioners to make a specific finding, that's where you would include it.
So virtually, either let planning and zoning make the decision, or the Board of Commissioners would make the decision.
What it would require, the first option would be to require planning and zoning staff, planning and zoning commission, and Board of Commissioners consider whether or not it should be zoned to a particular use. So every time, if I'm walking before this board and I'm asking you to rezone property, I have to address all those factors, because that's what your decision is supposed to be based off of. And if one of those is that should this property be conditioned or not, I have to address that. And you as the commissioners have to consider it. That's one option. The second option would be to mandate it, that at any time the Board of Commissioners rezones property, that you do it to the use that they've applied for. When I say the use, not just that they want to be in C1, but they want to build a daycare. They want to build a
X.
Right.
in that lot.
Can I just ask a question of Lisa? What is the requirement for a preliminary plat or some design to be presented to planning and development? Surely not if you rezone 1 acre of ag to R1 to build a house. I mean, that doesn't require any kind of plan or plat to be presented, but certainly.
So you have to have a conceptual plan. It has to be presented, preliminary plat, showing what you're actually proposing to develop. In sense of a residential, it would be the lots. You would show the lots, the open space, if there's going to be a major subdivision, whatever the open space would look like. Commercial, same thing, lots, and what area is being proposed for what use.
But how many dwelling units constitutes when you go from a minor to a major subdivision? Is a minor subdivision required to have a plat?
To have a plat?
Yeah.
Yes, it's required to have a plat.
A minor
anything you're
subdivision.
subdividing requires a recorded plat. It has to be subdivided and recorded.
Yeah.
But you're talking about a concept plan? Is that what you're
Well,
talking
yeah.
about?
What we're talking about here is holding somebody to the conditions that they propose to do, and I'm not sure that would really apply to, a single-family residential construction project. Even if they're rezoning, say 2 acres from ag to R1, or would that still require a?
No, it doesn't require that.
I mean,
your current ordinance.
they would necessarily have to. The rezoning would be conditioned on their filing a plat to say that these 2 acres are now separate from the larger parcel or whatever, but I understand that. But it wouldn't require them to actually build a house on that property, right?
So the rezoning doesn't put in play them subdividing it. It just rezone it so that they can meet the minimum requirement of the ordinance when they actually subdivide it for a minor plat.
Right.
When it's just as 2 parcels. So we don't hold them to what the actual parcels will look like, because a lot of times the soil, the health department is gonna dictate that.
Yeah.
Whether or not what the lots would need to look like. There are several factors that are gonna come into play. So typically when you're doing a minor subdivision, the rezoning come first, and then they go to the extreme of getting the drawings done and the plans to a surveyor.
I mean, as I understand it, you can't rezone, well, you can't combine dissimilar zones, is that correct?
Right, you
Yeah, I
cannot
mean,
combine 2
If
separate
one's
zones.
ag and
Right.
another's or something, you can't combine them to,
Without rezoning one or the other.
right, so they
Right.
both have to have the same zone.
They both have to have the
right.
same zoning.
Well,
Commissioner,
all I'm saying is if we say we have to apply conditions, we really are not talking about conditions associated with single-family residential construction or R1 or R1R properties. I mean, RPUD, yes, RM3 perhaps, depending upon what's going in there, but anyway.
Commissioner, go right ahead.
This question of whether we sometimes, always, never require the developer to stick to the requested use. I mean, my sense is it shouldn't be never and it shouldn't be always, but if it's therefore sometimes, a question for the attorney is whether we would be advised to have some criteria in the code that might indicate how we would judge it on a case-by-case basis. Because I think that might both help us, but also help guide the developer.
I think, yeah, you could reference, Mercy, if you'll scroll to the one above. I think the reference should be, point well taken, that it would, looking at factors 1 through 8, as a should that would be dictating number 9. In other words, and we could also include in there that some findings that would need to be made. You know, we could, for lack of a better term, put the bones around it, or excuse me, have the bones of that, but then put around it that would include, as a result of the intensity of the use or the impact on the adjoining landowners, that kind of thing. So yes, sir. I think one way to do that would be to reference 1 through 8, and then also maybe include in there the finding of why we would do that. I think that's not a bad idea if that's the route that the board wanted to go.
Because I think it comes back to this tension between the current code in a certain district and often the many allowable uses that are quite varied in their potential impact, and yet we treat them as equal. And then we're trying to sort of counter that by saying that sometimes, or perhaps always, we might hold the developer to a specific thing. But I think it just begs the question, kind of like the CC district, whether perhaps some of our allowed uses are too broad, too varied, and that's the root cause of the problem sometimes. And perhaps we should also think about addressing the root cause and not just the secondary effects.
Other questions?
So commissioners, I will just briefly go over a few more since I know we're short on time. We didn't get to the PUD, but I do think that there needs to be some conversations about PUD. One thing that me and Ms. Jackson talked about was making a side setback of minimum 10 foot, which would give you 20 foot within a PUD. Currently, you allow the developer of the PUD to set their own rules, but I think setting a floor here would allow for emergency vehicle access to both sides of a residential property.
Does that meet with,
I think we've been going
fire
with 10-foot setbacks for both sides. I think that's,
Between the buildings.
and is 20 feet allow enough?
So we had established that 10-foot setback with 20 feet distance, right, separation.
So that's 10 per lot.
10 per lot, right.
so we're putting that, suggesting putting that as a requirement, a minimum standard. And then for the density currently in PUD, you're allowed up to 8 residential units per acre, but we wanted to limit the acreage to only the non-common open space. So it would have the effect of lowering the density within PUDs. One maybe overarching thing that staff has talked about was an expiration for a preliminary plat. So currently, if you have a preliminary plat, we don't really have any deadline on it. But our suggestion would be that if a preliminary plat comes and is approved, you have 1 year to get the final plat, or else you have to start over. And the concept there is that if neighboring parcels have been developed and built out, there could be an impact that wasn't thought of at the first TRC meeting that needs to go back through. That was a relatively easy one, but that would also include PUDs. So if there was a PUD concept plan that came and went after 1 year, you wouldn't lose your zoning, but you would not be allowed to develop unless you go back through the TRC process. I do have a proposed ordinance for build-to-rent projects that Commissioner Hersey has brought up. It would be added to the performance standards, and then you'd have to define where you wanted to do that use. My guess is that you would not do it in R1R, probably not in R1. I would limit it probably to R2, but that I'll send that out to everybody, and y'all can have a look at that. And then one other small issue that has come up a couple of times in the past year, for y'all's preliminary plat to final plat approval, we have been in the process, we've allowed developers, not allowed, your ordinances allow developers to put up security for certain improvements that are not completed before a final plat issues. And you're doing that based off a very small portion of your ordinances. In fact, I'm going to take a little bit of liberty. I see that it is 5 o'clock, but if I could put this one up. Or you may already have this one. It's the 286166. So 2866 has a provision. It currently reads that the requirements that this is in order to get the final plat. The requirements of this section shall apply to every major subdivision and site development and shall be planned for and provided by the developer for installation. And currently it reads and/or payment prior to the approval of the final plat. That provision would allow someone to make a security in exchange for the improvement in order to get the final plat. My suggestion, this is I'm trying to meet where the code currently does, but Ms. Jackson and myself talked before the meeting about possibly reining in the ability of a developer to use this, but I would suggest that we put some attention towards this. One, I want to better define what that security is. So instead of saying payment, say security for improvements in accordance with subsection M. And Mercy, if you'll scroll to that. Basically, what I would like to do is set out the process for placing a bond in place for improvements that aren't completed before final plat, defining that it either be cash, performance bond, or line of credit. The process by which that gets done, detailed accounting, and then the way that the security remains until completed. This is to sort of keep the status quo. One thing that I've been talking with Ms. Jackson about is currently your ordinances, someone could get a preliminary plat, put up the bond for the improvements, and get a final plat all in a very small time frame. I think that makes Lisa uneasy sometimes. And what she and myself were talking about is I don't believe that's the intention. My experience with this type of procedure has more to do with construction delays or supply chain issues where the development is nearly completed, but we don't want to hold up further development. Instead, we'll bond a small portion of it or some of it. I think after talking with Lisa about it, perhaps we should consider it being a percentage of the project can be bonded instead of the full amount. I don't want y'all to make a decision about that. In fact, I would put this a little bit further down. It's just that I think we've had this 3 times in the past 2 years. This has come up. And so I would want this to be included in y'all's conversations. I don't currently have a proposal in there on the amount. So I would reference that you can keep it as is. This is the status quo. But if you wanted to include in there that you were only allowed to use this, either a dollar figure or maybe a percentage cost of the overall development, I think that would probably be a more, you would probably be putting more assurances that you get what you're asked, what says is going to be there.
Which makes more sense, percentage cost? That's what I would think.
I think
but-
percentage of the project's better. Regardless, it's always going to be a little bit dicey if it all falls to pieces because now we become general contractors.
That's right.
But the closer that is to completion, the better off it is, I think. So,
Thoughts?
that's to tide you over until 6 o'clock. So.
I believe percentage is gonna be your best shot.
That's what I think.
But trying to put a price tag on something like that would be.
I think we're all good with a percentage, so.
Yeah, I'll leave it as is, but when we bring it back to you, we'll have something in there, so.
Okay, anything else?
No, sir, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen,
Yeah, let me just mention, fire chief has been waiting almost 2 years now to have a revision of the fire code ordinance considered by this board. And I think his patience is deserving of a hearing of the changes to the ordinance that he would like to see.
I don't think there's any disagreement with that. Other comments? Well, I'll say thank you. This has moved us along, and I believe that our next thing that will happen is probably a second work session, or it will be the third actually, and then prepare something final that
Well-
actually goes over to the Planning and Zoning Board. And then we'll have a public hearing where we have public comments.
It would be getting close to time for y'all to tell us which ones to move on, because we'll get these closer based on our conversations, what I heard today. And then the way that the process works is the commissioner puts it on the agenda for, to have a public hearing held. And then once you do that, we'll then go to the planning commission and move its way back to you guys. But let me get these ordinances to y'all and whoever wants to pull the trigger on putting it on there. I do think, like we talked about several times now, we're trying to do this with the ones that are most pressing. And I do want to be careful about not overloading the process because we've had that problem before where it takes a long time to get something across the finish line. But it's up to you guys to prioritize which ones you want to move on.
So we'll work on a final work session and then ready to go. We want to make sure it's ready and then let the public have comments. Very good. Thank you again for being here. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So move, Ms. Jeb.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I believe, are we going to vote electronically or we're going to vote verbally? District 1, how do you vote?
Aye.
District 2? Aye. District 3? District 4? Aye. The ayes have it. And this will conclude this business for the work session, and I declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you, gentlemen.